Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. My dear brothers and sisters, dear viewers, welcome to another special podcast. And we are trying to bring you real issues of the Muslim world, the world around us. And specifically in these series, we've been focusing on education, Muslim education in the world. And we've had Brother Michael Abraham, who is an expert in this field, talk to us about his experiences. I brought my experiences as a school teacher, school principal, as well as educational consultant, traveling around the world. Alhamdulillah, and today, we're joined by also our sister Khadija, or Coach Khadija, who is joining us from Australia, mashallah. I've had the opportunity to do a few podcasts with Brother Michael Abraham, and I had the opportunity to do one with Coach Khadija before as well, just to give you a little bit background, brothers and sisters who are watching and tuning in today. Sister Khadija Kaddour she empowers mothers to rediscover themselves, to reclaim their self-worth. She talks about parenting, about relationships, and she talks about how to raise. Last time I talked to her was about how to raise emotionally intelligent or emotionally fluent boys. We're talking about males, and mashallah, she's raised 5 boys, mashallah. And she has, I think I said, a 14-year-old, a 17-year-old, and a 22-year-old, mashallah. Right? So these guys. Right. So teenage bracket, and I mean, one of them is 22, is an adult, right?
Young man. Yeah.
He's a young man, mashallah. Okay, so you can check out.
It's still adolescence in
according to
right.
neurological sense. Yep.
That's right. So you can check out Muslim Motherhood Coach, inshallah, on Instagram, and you'll see her social media. And of course, Brother Michael Abraham Education, is a teacher and creator of a K-12 educating program called Engaging Muslim Students in the Public School. He's an author of the same book, and you can check him out again on Instagram, and you can see his website, abrahameducation.com. Welcome. Assalamu alaikum, brother and sister. Hope you're okay, inshallah, both of you. So inshallah, tonight we're going to, for the next half an hour, 45 minutes, we're going to try to discuss a very important issue, as we always try to do, and that is we're trying to merge education and parenting. We have an expert in education and inshallah an expert in parenting, and specifically want to focus on the experience of Muslim students, be it boys or girls, but we've been focusing a lot on boys because, I mean, if you look at education in general, and I think Brother Michael Abraham has alluded to that quite a few times, and many studies, that boys usually are a bit back. They're not as successful, and there are reasons for that. Inshallah, maybe we can talk. So we brought in Coach Khadija as well, who's lived in Australia, I think born and raised there, daughter of a revered sister. Her mother reverted in the 70s, mashallah, and she had the experiences of attending public school as a teenager. So we're trying to understand that now. Fast forwarding, Brother Michael Abraham is an expert educational consultant, has put a curriculum together. Really, I was able to receive the book. Jazakallah khair, Brother Michael Abraham. He sent me the book. I've looked at it. You know, it's like, it's not a book that you read. This is something that you have to study and you have to learn. And as a teacher, be that you're Muslim or non-Muslim, you want to use this as a resource, as a guide to help you to engage. That's the key word, to engage Muslim students in the public education sector. Coach Khadija as well, mashallah, she's developed a lot of resources, and she is a counselor, coach that works with parents and specifically with mothers to help raise children. And mashallah, she's got first-hand experience. So tonight, inshallah, what I want to focus on is your experiences, your professional and personal experiences in the public school system. And how, I guess the main thing is, how can we, as Muslim educators, Muslim leaders, how can we facilitate or help parents who are right now confused? 21st century, 2021, a lot of parents are confused. They cannot afford to send their children to Islamic school or to some private expensive school. Many, I'm not sure you can correct me, but if not most of our brothers and sisters who are parents are sending their children in the West to public schools. All right, this is the reality. So do we just sit there and be like, well, you know, these are bad schools, what can we do, complain, or do we actually do something about it? So let me start, inshallah, if you don't mind, with Coach Khadija. And I have this question. How was your experience growing up in Australia as a Muslim woman, Muslim sister in your teenage years in the public school? What did you see? What were your problems, if you want to maybe share with us?
So most of my schooling was in a public school. I think I went to a Muslim school only 2 years of that whole schooling experience. I found the 2 years at a Muslim school quite traumatic, but the time that I experienced at a public school, I actually found better. I think it was, I grew up basically, I went to the only Muslim family in the whole public school. So I grew up in a place called Wollongong near Sydney, and so we're the only Muslims. So mum basically instilled into us that you're different, but you're also Australian. And we basically knew we were different, but there was a very strong emphasis towards good manners and a very strong tawakkul mindset, like trust in Allah, you know, Allah's going to be there for you. When I hit teenage, and it was also during the Gulf War, so there was this kind of anti-Arab underlie there. So you always knew you were a little bit different. When I was a teenager, I just knew that what happened was I remember going into that back into public school and high school, and I remember there was about 10 Muslim boys that were all going in at the same time as me. There was a few girls and many boys. Majority of those boys ended up, I remember, like discarding a lot of aspects of their deen, and a lot of the girls took their hijab off and that. So I was one of the few that was left that, you know, really practicing. And I think the biggest thing that helped me to stay practicing as a teenager in a situation where you have that pressure of boyfriend, girlfriend, you have so much things going on around you, parties every weekend, you know, all these things, is really mum's how she installed into us our upbringing and our deen, which was really just to be very proud of your identity, that you're very capable, that, you know, I think she brought a real love of Islam to us. And what I experienced with a lot of Muslims that were brought up, their kind of perception of Islam was all about haram, and these are the rules, and kind of a harshness. And so there wasn't this intrinsic motivation to, example, pray dhuhr at lunchtime. There wasn't that kind of, it came from because they were forced by their parents to kind of be a Muslim. And so there was very few of us that actually went and actually kept practicing as a Muslim, as in a public school. And that mainly came because we were just brought up with those of us that didn't include that stayed kind of practicing, is because we just had a strong love for Islam. Like, we were brought up on a concept of Islam. Like, mum always had this thing, Islam's going to save you. It's, you know, their life is pretty empty and they're lost. And I saw that especially in 11 and 12, and a lot more things were going on. And I really had this we just were brought up with this strong concept that Allah is there for you, always merciful, always loving, and He will support you through anything. So there was almost like a wanting to please Him, not coming from a place of, oh no, I'm going to get punished. There was no concept of that for my upbringing anyway. And I did see that's the biggest difference, is with children that were kind of told by the parents, oh, go pray, or you're going to go to hellfire if you do this or that. They're the ones that rebelled. They're the ones that kind of said, no, I just want to fit in. The other thing is, I think one of the things that helped so much was my mum installed into us, especially as teenagers, that your validation only comes from Allah. So there was this kind of, there wasn't so much a need to be validated by peers and other people, because we kept being reminded that Allah's there for you, yet you're gaining your faith, your validation from Him. So you kind of felt special to be a practicing Muslim. It was a different way of being raised. So I felt, and also this concept that you can do anything. My mom has very strong instilled in us, you're capable. I was a basketball player. I used to hit basketball, full covered. I used to be on the public speaking team. So I was able to still be a practicing Muslim and see that as something that empowered me, not as something that diminished me as a person.
So you said that your experience in the Muslim school was traumatic. Like, could you expand a little bit on that?
I think I was kind of brought up with a naive concept from my mother and the people around me that Muslims were very practicing and Muslims were very honest, and Muslims, a whole lot of, my mum tried to bring us up with a very positive concept. my first 12 years of life, I had very little contact with Muslims. My father's Lebanese, but we lived in a place where my parents pretty much isolated us in our upbringing. And my concept of Islam was very much brought up on my mother's revert love for deen. So when I was we moved over to Perth and we went to Muslim public school, a high school at that time. When we enrolled, the level of bullying and lack of integrity was just so shocking as a very young 12, 13-year-old. It was so hypocritical to see that it was really demoralizing. So I found it was really difficult because the concept that I've been brought up was, well, if people do wrong actions, they're not a practicing Muslim type thing. And so here I was in a school where people were smoking weed behind the library, or there was girlfriend boyfriends. There was things happening that were completely against our deen. And it was just the integrity and the honesty, the values for honesty and trustworthiness and not gossiping and all that. It wasn't there. I had found much better characteristics in the non-Muslims that I had grown up with. And so I was very shocked to my iman at that time. And I just begged my mother to get out. And when she realized what was going on, she put us back into a public school where I felt like I was more free to practice as a Muslim, because it was like, I could easily see if they're doing something wrong, they're not Muslim. That's easy to decipher. But when you're growing up with Muslims that are doing everything wrong, it's almost like plays with your identity. It plays with, okay, well, they're doing it wrong too. Where's my blueprint here? Because so it's almost like you have to find any blueprint. Of course, is that pure Islam, but so many people are brought up culturally. They're brought up with, cultural ideas of Islam. They're brought up with bid'ahs, and they're brought up with, with all different groups and stuff. And there was a very strong affiliation to not gangs, but kind of your nationality was very, very emphasized. And so I grew up as an Australian, and my father's Lebanese, but it was like I didn't have that nationalism. And they had very strong, the Malays hanged out with the Malays, the Africans hanged out with the Africans, the Lebanese hanged out with the Lebanese. It was a very nationalistic, and that pre-decide what that kind of came first before the Islam, if that makes sense.
Mm.
Yeah.
Brother Michael Abraham, you've taught in both Muslim schools in Saudi Arabia as well as the obviously public system, and you are teaching currently in the public system. What do you see? I mean, what do you think? Why is there, what Sister Khadija said? Do you see that? Is there a problem in the Muslim schools? Is this lack of ethics and morals and direction? What's the reason? Maybe this is very alarming to say that the non-Muslims have better values or better integrity than the Muslims. It's a very, very alarming state for our parents, for those who hope to put their children in Islamic schools. A lot of times parents think that I'll put my child in Islamic school, they'll be safe, right? They kind of drop them off, like they do at the masjid. They drop them off to the masjid and think that's it. That's good enough, right? What did you see, my brother?
Well, there's an extent to which that phenomenon is general amongst teenagers. The thing that I try to tell Muslim parents a lot is to understand that the needs of teenagers are primarily emotional. They're primarily emotional, and in many ways, their emotional needs are larger than even kids younger than them, who are preteens or small children. So, teenagers, they're inherently insecure, and they're inherently emotionally imbalanced. Now, Muslim kids growing up in the West, when they experience reinforcement of Islam, only with this harshness, that resonates with them a certain way. And teenagers, they actually very, very much want guidance from adults, and they have a strong need for structure in their lives. So they're very responsive to adults who are calm with them, and adults who they don't feel are emotionally impacted by their own actions. The teenager's own actions. So it seems to me maybe that if you grow up in a homogeneous environment, like the more traditional Muslim world, where all the adults are reinforcing the same thing, this kind of harsh emotionalism with young people, it might work to keep them on a certain path. I don't know as it develops intrinsic motivation for the deen, but it might work to keep them on a certain path because everyone's reinforcing the same thing.
Simple.
When you're in a place where there's ultimately a competition for their minds and for what they want, they're going to take that harshness in a very negative way, and it's going to compound insecurities that they inherently have, and it will likely cause them to emotionally withdraw from those relationships, which then leads to rebellion against those relationships with the parents. Another thing about the needs of teenagers, there's neurological reasons why teenagers, they prioritize they prioritize excitement and thrill in decision making, and they downplay risk in decision making. So teenagers, they're generally healthy, but they're the age group that is most likely to be injured by preventable accidents, and they're the age group most likely to experience death by non-natural causes, because they tend to downplay risk in decision making, especially if there's some thrill involved, and they have specific chemical neurological needs of why that's the case. So having kids develop with a mission sense of Islam, that is something that is very much needed for them to feel a sense of empowerment through practicing the self-discipline that Islam puts upon you. Otherwise, they just experience that self-discipline as something restraining and something restrictive. And because they have these neurological needs for thrill, they'll very easily rationalize that self-discipline away and go seek the more thrilling behaviors that they give into with peer pressure and this type of thing. So that's a general issue with teenagers, that immigrant Muslim parents might be less equipped to deal with that, because they don't have the experience in the society yet, and they do as hard as they can. That's not to fault them. And really too, when I talk to parents, I try a lot to talk to people in their 20s and their young 20s about these types of things. And that age is an important age to start learning about these things. One, because they can reflect on their adolescent experience now, because they are going to forget a lot of it. And two, you really want to know these things ahead of time with raising kids in any stage. You want to have a sense of what they're going to go through at each stage of development beforehand, so you can help prepare them, because that helps create more security in the relationship when you can do that. As far as things like praying in school is very, very tough for kids in the West, for Muslim kids in the West. It is very difficult, especially kids of immigrants. They in the Muslim world, everything is structured around the prayer. When businesses open and close, when the school schedule is, what the adults do, what the kids do. There's no adolescent kid in the Muslim world who has to advocate not only for their right to do the salah, but also for the structure that they need to do the salah. Because to do the salah effectively takes a certain amount of structure, with scheduling, time and place, and the duration of it. So these Muslim kids in the West, they're faced with a lot of pressure to do the salah from the religion, from themselves, from the parents, from the community. But in order to do it, they're being left alone to have to do this type of advocacy that even their parents didn't have to do. So who's going to coach them through the emotional trials of having to do that? And that's just a microcosm of a general way of how the kids, they don't usually see Muslims, their Muslim parents or Muslim adults, interacting and participating in society with the non-Muslims in a way where those Muslim adults are maintaining their own Muslim identity.
Right.
And the school certainly doesn't reinforce that. So it becomes easier as, it's actually easy for teenagers to have like a dual personality thing, because their minds are very flexible. Because the way their brains are developing, they can shift the way they are from one place to another very, very easily. So it's very easy for a teenager to act one way in the masjid and one way in the home, and then an entirely different way in school, an entirely different way on social media, maybe. And then when they start getting into their 20s, then the mind starts to stiffen a little bit, and you have to like make more of a determination of what your life really stands about, and your mind is more capable of making that type of determination. So the Muslim youth who grow up that way, when they get to that age, they're left with a dilemma of which way do I choose then? And the fact is the reality is usually they are at an age where they have to establish themselves in their careers. They have to try to establish themselves in a way where they want to get a family. They have to establish themselves in Western society. But they haven't seen Muslims do that as Muslims. They've only seen Muslims do that in a way that is highly capitulatory towards the deen. So, again, and I hate to bring everything back to my book and training program, but I honestly believe it is a big thing, because a way that parents can start dealing with this is the book and the training program, and recommending it to your kids' teachers teacher and your kid's principal. That is at least a small way that your kids can begin to see you interacting with the non-Muslim in a way you're showing that the kid's Muslim identity matters to you, and that their knowledge about what it means for this kid to be Muslim matters to you. I mean, just a small way. And you know, if you get your kid's teacher reading the book or taking the training, the online course, it's going to lead to all sorts of other discussions that you can have. You can continue to talk about these kids, you know, and you know, another thing just with teenagers, spending time with them is very, very important. And a common mistake that parents make, Muslim parents and non-Muslim parents, is they tend to do this rationalization where when kids get to adolescence, it's like, well, they're growing up now, that, you know, they need to start learning how to be an adult. They need to start doing things on their own. So I'm going to kind of let them be free and let them make mistakes. A lot of times on the adults, that is their own emotional rationalization towards abdicating their own responsibility of guiding that kid when they need it the most, actually. Like teenagers need consistent time put in with them. They need structure put in with them. They need a lot of help with the increasing responsibilities that they have. And that's just a huge mistake that parents make all the time that I see.
It reinforces what I did with the boys, because when I took them to public high school and we had the meetings, it was like, okay, where's the prayer room? And one of them had gone into a public school where, alhamdulillah, they had 100 kids praying Jummah. So they had arranged the community centre, which was 500 metres down the road. They had arranged the imam to go there. And so all these boys would go and pray there. And I would have this discussion with the boys, both of them, you know, where are you going to pray in that? And it's interesting, sometimes, you know, there was that apprehension, and I was like, Mum, I prayed Dhuhr like in the last 10 minutes. So I prayed like when school finished and I quickly went to the room. So we would have those discussions. And I remember once there was an excursion, and I'm like, how did you pray? He's like, I had to go pray in the bush. But he had that. And so it is a lot of pressure on them. That little bit of iman kind of keeps them like, and because I'm like checking in with them, you know, and how did you do it? That engagement, because what most children do and teenagers do, they disengage the second you come in with a negative assumption of them or a negative label of them. And that's why I see so much where children disengage with their teachers or their parents and that, because the parents coming in from this place of not, let's negotiate and work out how this will work with you. Instead of coming in as like, have you prayed, and kind of like this punishment. And like you said, that time, but I think time also, it's a matter of really validating how they're experiencing, because I see so much as a parent and working with so many parents, there's two things that really get in the way. It's the labels that they have put on their children. You know, it's like, oh no, my child's going to, you know, he's not doing this, and he's, you know, starting to talk to friends. And so they create this kind of negative perception of that child. They're going to interact with that teenager from a negative place. And so you're actually pushing that teenager away, which is more they're triggered by their own past wounds that they haven't healed. And the other thing is they dismiss their teenagers' experience. And I see this a lot where, for example, their daughter's struggling with hijab at school, and it's kind of like, no, you have to do it. And it's not actually sitting down and having that heart-to-heart conversation. Yeah, I see you're struggling. I know that's not easy, you know, or their sons, you know, having those conversations, good company and whatever that is. But that only happens, and like you said, there's this idea that, you know, you just drop them to school, whether it's a Muslim school, and it's like, they'll be fine, you know, the school will raise them. But the most important thing where children learn the most, you know, everything to do with their cultural upbringing, the unspoken rules that they are raised with, the beliefs that they have subconsciously, that's actually comes from the home. So the child is in a Muslim school, public school, they have to be actively involved. They have to be actively involved. Like you said, the motivation as a parent, if anything, when they hit teenager, is keeping that communication with them, really having a strong attachment to them, a strong relationship with them, communicating with them, checking with them, but not in a kind of like a hostile or kind of like, what's the word when parents kind of like hoover over their children, not like in a controlling way. In a way that I respect you, you're capable to be a Muslim, and I'm here to support you. And I know it's not easy, like validating the struggle of being a Muslim teenager in a public school where, you know, he'll come home and he'll say things like, Mum, you know, I feel sorry for the girls that have to use, the little girls that come in year 7 and 8 and have to use the boys' toilet. Like when I go to use the boys' toilet and have to do shared gender toilets, and I don't want to go in because I feel sorry for the girls that are trying to go. So they're having those conversations with him. having conversations that, Mum, there's so many, LGBT girls and boys around, having those open conversations that he knows he can come and have that and let those frustrations out. Because if not, he's going to maybe go to somebody else that might not be able to help to guide and support him through the environment of being in that environment, which is totally un-Islamic.
Mm-hmm. So you're saying the concept of open communication between the parents and their teenagers to be able to express those frustrations or their experiences that they're faced with in the public school or wherever in their life. So that's a key point, right? From a parent's perspective, and how they can facilitate some of these these questions being answered, or just someone to listen to, or to feel like you can talk to someone is very important. So that's from the parent's perspective. How about teachers though? How can teachers help in? Is communication between teachers and students important, or is this something that's left only to parents?
I found one of the things one of my sons told me, he's 17, when he started this public school, this particular one he went to, this was year 11 and year 12. He said to me on the first day, Mum, the teacher checked in with me to see if she could say my name properly. No one's ever done that before. His name's Ayub, and a lot of people non-Muslims find Ayub hard to say. And she said, she's checked in and she said, I need to pronounce your name properly because your name matters. And I thought that was a big thing because, I know growing up, many of us that were Muslim, many would change their name to kind of suit the identity.
Right.
If you were Muhammad, you became Michael. If you were, I can't give examples now, but you changed it to kind of to change that connotation. I remember he had a job, he had a part-time job, and the boss took him into, he had a Muslim boss. It was a few months ago, and he took him into a center, and he said to him, Ayub, I want you to be David for the next few hours. And Ayub, I remember how he was fuming. He's like, no, I'm not David, I'm Ayub. And he goes, his boss was, I can't remember his name, but he changed it. And so that teaching them that, no, you honor your identity, that only comes from you as a parent, passing that blueprint over, how proud it is to be and hold on to your identity. Because we are in a time when, it's so easy to let go of that. Cultivating that in him, that he's the 17-year-old sticking up for his name. And yet he got that validation from a non-Muslim teacher who said, I need to validate your name. So I think my thing is that especially with children, especially with teenagers, any second you give a negative assumption to them, you deceive them in a negative way, you downplay their Islam. Like you tell them, just take the scarf off for a while, or it's okay, I understand you struggle. The second you do that, you teach them, because our deen to some way is intolerant. But it's actually a good thing, because if we were tolerant to everything, we wouldn't have a deen. Our deen is made to be intolerant to some extent because we stand for something. If we weren't intolerant, then we would do everything that is possible. We wouldn't stand up for the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. We wouldn't, have marriage. We wouldn't emphasize marriage. We would be doing zina. I think that's quite normal and okay.
Right.
Part of that is it's a moral compass that we're passing on. The second you dilute that, your grandchildren get affected, and your great-grandchildren, because that will get diminished. There'll be holes in that blueprint that get wiped off each time. If we start, example, celebrating birthdays, or we start adding all these things in, over time, our generation of these children as they go by, our deen is going to get diluted. Right. And so when we emphasize values, our deen is principles and values with mercy, principles and values. Our Prophet was sent as a mercy for all mankind. I think that for me as a mother with my children, really emphasizing to them that holding on to your deen is probably the best thing that's going to help you in your mental and emotional health, but in a way that's not put down, not in a harsh way, not in a way that makes them feel pressured. It's a conversation, a connected conversation without negative assumption. It's almost like, I know you're capable and I'm holding you capable and I'm here to support you, and Allah has your back. Doesn't matter whatever happens, Allah's always going to be there for you. It's more of a positive reinforcement. And anything that you have a positive reinforcement to, that child's going to connect to it. They need to connect to it. That's why so many people, you think as adults, they don't establish salat. They didn't have a connection to it. You have to have a connection to Allah to worship Him. And so with that lens of seeing Allah from a more loving place, from a place that Allah is really there for me, that Allah has made me capable, Allah will help me through. If I have an issue, Allah will help me through. And this came up when my son was he was discussing something and then came to like a negative outcome. And I said to him, you're having like a negative, straight away go to negative thinking. Like Allah wants you to have to trust in Him and then Bismillah and just do it. And then he felt better because he realized his thinking was creating this negative outcome. By reminding him, no, Allah wants you to just do the action, trust in Him, and just, yeah, I can leave it. Allah will trust me and help me. He was confident again. So when we push back everything back to reminding them this tawakkul mindset, that's going to be the biggest thing that's going to help them, especially in public schools. This tawakkul mindset that Allah is always going to help you there. I mean, on Monday in Australia, we had the highest, I think it was the highest suicide phone calls that's ever recorded ever, because they keep putting us in lockdown and off and lockdown and off. Highest one, like in one day, it was, so many calls, and they've just put a few other cities into lockdown again. The fragile mental health of people is very strong, especially here in Australia. It's a real issue, and especially with teenagers, because they're not being able to get that social connection that they used to have, because most of them weren't brought up to be connected to their home. You don't feel a sense of connection and belonging. You look for that in your peers and other people. And so also in lockdown, being stuck with your parents, and it isn't, the gaps of those connection and belonging are not there. And so if we build our children to have that we all build that, the home is built on knowing that if you can turn to Allah in any condition, that keeps a thriving situation instead of a mental deterioration.
SubhanAllah. SubhanAllah. So you said that Monday was the highest incident call rate when it comes to people calling in the hotlines, the suicide hotlines,
yeah,
right?
Yeah.
This Monday.
This
Monday.
Monday. Yeah, past Monday.
SubhanAllah.
So we've got 2 big cities in lockdown. Yeah.
Allah, SubhanAllah. SubhanAllah. Brother Michael Abraham, so this is a very important point that Sister Khadija brings in, the importance of parents to support their children, to facilitate that development, to listen to them, to talk to them, to help them express themselves, to make that connection, the guidance. What do you think the role of the teacher comes in? What if the teacher doesn't care? Should the teacher care? What's the objective of a non-Muslim teacher? Do they really have to care? What do you see?
Well, I mean, they're going to care to the extent that we advocate for it. And I've said before, teachers experience pressure from all sorts of different places, but usually the last people they want to be displeased with them are the parents of their kids. That is something that is extremely dragging on a school when they know that they have even one parent, and especially if it's a community of parents. And an advantage we have in the public schools is our students and our families tend to be organized as a community more so than other parents. So if you get the feeling that a group of parents is displeased with you, no school wants that. And, in America, almost every state now has some modicum of school choice where you to take your kid out of a school if you want and put them in another school. And of course, homeschooling options are only increasing. And then we have Islamic schools. So, I mean, in American public schools, there is a market competition for kids because there's a dollar figure on the head of each kid who comes in the school from state taxes and property taxes and federal taxes. So, no principal wants to be in the spring telling their staff that we're cutting 2 or 3 positions next year because we're losing enrollment of kids. None of them want to be in that position. So this is a power that Muslim parents especially have in our public school system that they really need to leverage. What Khadija was saying about the school where 100 kids were praying Jummah a week. What I've known from schools where that is happening, that is almost always founded on a small group of parents doing a lot of strong advocacy. And I've known schools where they had 200 to 250 kids praying Jummah for 3-4 years, and then after 1 or 2 years, it dissipated completely. And when you dig further into it, it's because there was 2 or 3 or 4 families who, number one, they had kids, they had a son who was willing to lead the Jummah and had the confidence and the strength to do that, which is a big thing in there because a staff member can't lead the Jummah. The kids and families can provide a volunteer to come in to do it, or a kid has to do it. But that was one thing. But there was a base of families who were really advocating for it while the kids were in school. But once the students of those families left the school, the whole thing dissipated. So again, parent advocacy is a huge thing. Again, my book can shortcut the process with that. So I mean that's a big thing with the teacher. Like they're going to be very responsive to parental advocacy. too, you want to get on the same page with your kid's teacher of what you are projecting onto kids. And I would say nowadays in the West and in America, teachers are very, very confused over what they should project onto kids. And I find that when you give them something concrete, like we want self-discipline projected onto our kids, we want respect for older people projected onto our kids, we want chastity projected onto our kids, I find that even teachers who may not totally agree with those values, which is not most teachers actually, but in American public schools, surveying has been done with this. The average public school teacher in American public schools is actually more socially conservative than the average American, just so people know that. There's more to that. But I find teachers, they're very happy just to have something concrete to project onto the kids. Because, as the West has lost its foundations, things just revert to moral relativism and this type of thing. And so the only message that is left to give to kids is just be yourself and just do you and this type of thing. And that is actually a very, very damaging message to give to kids, especially teenagers, because they are inherently insecure about themselves. And when they get told that all the time, the way it resonates with them is, well, I don't really know who I am, but it sounds like I'm supposed to know who I am. So there must be something wrong with me. And that causes anxiety. So the kids, they're actually craving guidance and structure that's not being given to them. And we can provide it as a Muslim community, and having Islam and the values and principles of Islam, we have the tools necessary to provide it for people. Another thing, what Khadija was saying about labeling, that I'd like to say, teenagers especially, they tend to manifest what adults project onto them. So, the thing about a dynamic with teenagers is they're very much in development. They're very much unpermanent in the way they are because their minds are changing so much. About how they relate to others, very insecure about the way they are. Lazy, for example, and I see this all the time. A kid transitions from elementary to middle school, and middle school takes a whole different type of organization to be successful, that they need help with. And boys especially, they're not successful with that organization. And if they get shamed and told that they're lazy, then they take that as, okay, I'm lazy. And then they spend the rest of their school career not doing what they're supposed to do. And when confronted about it, they say, it's because I'm lazy, And at the root of this is because it was projected onto them. So I mean, that's a big thing. You have to have an idea of the kid, that they are in development. And that's a big reason why you should maintain a calm disposition with them. Because if you don't, it's only going to induce more anxiety in them. And it's going to make them look for emotional comfort in another place when it's that way. But being calm with them, it doesn't mean being loose with boundaries. It doesn't mean just letting them do whatever. But it just means, and too, teenagers especially, they're very sensitive to things like body language, things like facial expression, things like your tone of voice, like more so than adults are. They project a lot of intensity on those things. So a lot of the nervousness that we have about kids and the anxiety that we have about kids, the kids experience that as anger towards them, and they experience it as condemnation towards them, when we're maybe even not meaning it as anger, but we mean it as a nervous care towards them. Another thing I'll say too, and I know you asked about teachers, but about parents. A lot of Muslim parents, they have to ask themselves whether or not they want their kid to be as good as them, or they want them to be better than them in terms of Islam. And it's okay to want your kid to be better than you. But if you do, you have to be open with the kid about that. And you can't try to maintain some sort of image that you're perfect, or some sort of image that, that you're afraid to confront your own faults. Because as the kids get older in adolescence, they're going to see through that. And they're going to form some really sharp criticisms about that, especially when they get into their late teens. That might be a source of rebellion. But, it's especially a problem when parents, where they're confronting too much over the things that you can see visually, such as the clothing. Not that's not an important thing. But, of course, the Muslim girls, they have to not wear the hijab and all this type of stuff, and to show their beauty, very much so in Western society, and we need to criticize that for them. Pray Fajr regularly, or they see that, you know, you've taken interest in this and you had some rationalization for that, you know, the message they will take from that is, well, okay, we can actually play fast and loose with the rules, and the rules don't really matter. And mom and dad might rationalize not following the rules in this way. I'm going to rationalize not following these different rules in my way. And to them, it's following the same thing. It's following the same example. It's just in their own way. Now, again, I'm not saying this to try to make anyone feel bad or shame anyone, but, you know, I don't think it is like showing off your sins. If you have open conversations with your kids about how you have been weak, about your own weakness, you know, that makes you seem more real to the kids. That makes the kids empathize with you more. That is something that can motivate the kids to want to be stronger for your sake and for the sake of Allah, you know. So and it's something that breaks down defense walls, because adolescents, you know, because they're inherently insecure. Even a kid who is confident amongst his peer group, his or her peer group, there's so many situations you can put them in, they're insecure, but which is just inherent to the fact that their minds are changing so much, and they're inherently emotionally imbalanced. So it's very easy for them to put up defense walls. And another thing too about young kids, they experience time at a slower pace than adults do,
Yeah.
because they literally hold on to more immediate memories than adults do. The older your mind gets, the more you just hold on to what your brain deems to be the most important things and stick to those. So time goes by faster for the adults than it does for the kids. So this is part of how the kids, they start developing like an alternative life in some place isolated from the parents. That seems like something real, that's a really big deal in their development to them, but to the parents, they're not even noticing that it's happening. They're not even aware of it. And to them, time has just gone on as always. So it's easy that kids feel within themselves that from age like 11 to 12 to say 16, they feel like they've gone through some sort of big transformation in life, and they have. But to the parents, they more or less just kind of think you're the same kid as you were 12 or 11, because, you know, the kid just been acting the same way around.
Right.
So again, this goes back to the consistent time with them and just understand these dynamics.
Mashallah, mashallah. One of the things that resonates with me, what you said, brother Michael Abraham, is you said there's a competition for the hearts and the minds of our students. And you've also said that in a homogeneous society where everyone's kind of reinforcing the same rules, it might work where you bring in some strictness and harshness. But subhanAllah, I would argue that with the advent of social media and the world being open, being colonized, right now, even in the Muslim countries, you don't have that homogeneous approach or that strictness that can, I mean, maybe at a time of our parents or our grandparents, yes, but right now there's a crisis in Muslim countries due to social media, due to, you know, just the international travel, people migrating for work, for whatever. Cultures have shifted now. There's a lot of alternative ideas and philosophies present within Muslim countries, and that competition for the minds and the hearts of the students, what I've seen anyway as a teacher in a Muslim country, was pretty much there. I went as a Muslim Western teacher to teach in a Muslim country. With me came a majority non-Muslim Western teachers who brought their own values and their own philosophies and approaches. And I could see it, that I've had to readjust my way of teaching because I was losing. I could see the non-Muslim teachers being more cool. The kids were, you know, connecting to them better. And I said, subhanAllah, I said, and I could see the Muslim children changing towards the worse, okay? Because they were connecting to these non-Muslim teachers who were standing with them in front of them for about 6 to 8 hours a day. They were somehow infatuated by them. I mean, what do you expect when you spend such, a lot of time with them? Kids, they start loving their teachers. They start looking up to their teacher, their role models. So I had to readjust my strategy to the way I was teaching and the way, I successfully connected with my students and was able to bring back the concept of Islam and for them to love Islam and to realize, no, wait a second, we are Muslims. They are not. We respect them and everything. Yeah. and we could see value in their education, but we are Muslim, we don't have to change, right?
Yes.
What do you guys think about that?
Something I'd say too with digital, and I totally agree with you with regards to the Muslim world, social media, the competition. Two things. One, it's important to be in the digital sphere competing for kids, and everyone's so wrapped up in how much of their experience is digital. But these digital native kids, that phenomenon, it actually makes them value a good relationship with an adult that they know in person more than before, not less. Because someone who develops a good relationship with them in person is more rare to them now. So this emphasizes the importance of Muslims to be and teaching themselves, and especially for males, and especially for grown males in the Muslim community, to try to be in physical spaces where the young people are. Because Muslim male, it's easier in males in general to withdraw from that responsibility. And we need to be in those places and teaching in the schools, not least amongst them. Everyone's very concerned about the liberalization that's gone on over the past 10, 15 years, and with Muslims who are maybe in their 20s, both in the Muslim world and here. Something I like people to be aware of with that, if you look at the West and its liberalization movements, like you could maybe compare it to the baby boom generation and the liberalization they went through in the 1960s to a degree, although it's not been as extreme as that was. But people need to understand too that there was a huge conservative backswing amongst that generation when they hit midlife. And in the Western world, they have this concept of a midlife crisis. So people have to understand that these young adult Muslims who've fallen into these things in their 20s, they're misguided and lost right now. The fact that they're lost and they're upon weak foundations and whatever they're upon, that is the reality of that is really going to hit them when they get to midlife. So the community has to start thinking now about how they are going to be able to receive those people at that age, because they will actually be ripe for coming back to the deen at that age. And you saw this happen in the West with the evangelical movement and the televangelist movement in the late 70s and 1980s amongst baby boom and figures like Pat Robinson and the Reagan Revolution and all that. That was built on a conservative backswing amongst middle-aged boomers who, their liberalized visions of their youth had faded on them. So that's just a whole aspect that people need to understand. I like to make aware to people to start thinking about.
MashaAllah. Sister Khadija, we have about 8 minutes, guys. Any last thoughts and comments, inshallah? Beautiful discussion. I mean, it's really something that we need more and more of this. But alhamdulillah, hopefully we can do it again, inshallah. Sister Khadija, any?
Just knowing that you as a parent, you're the one person that's going to have the ability to shape your child's, identity, character, your perception that they have. What I'm seeing a lot with women that I work with is a lot of our children are being brought up with kind of negative connotations towards the opposite sex. So they're being brought up by seeing maybe as a lot of girls, teenage girls or young women don't want to get married. They've got very negative ideas about men. And I see a lot of boys being brought up where their mother has kind of instilled into them a kind of negative connotation of towards. So they themselves are kind of being brought up with their mother's kind of wounds around men and that kind of ideology. And so, and I remember listening to a talk just recently where they talked about it in the Blacks' Rights movement, the civil rights blacks movement, where back in the 60s and 70s, where the nuclear family in black families was very intact, like mother, father, child. And then now we're at a situation where it's like 70% of Black Americans are brought up with single mothers, and most of them are born out of wedlock. And so that blueprint's being passed on generation to generation. And part of it was that kind of this feminist critique of male privilege and the feminist kind of ideas around the male, which broke away these women's concept of like this their concept of men to the point where it's all about women's empowerment and I can raise a home and stuff. And now you're having this generation of children, young men, who are like, no, I want to grow up with a father. I want to raise my children. I want to be a father to my children. Many of them were raised by single mothers, and it's interesting when you speak. I've spoke to a few young men, and who want to be good fathers, but then they grapple because they don't have a blueprint around what a good father looks like, being a good father, right? So my thing is, there is this kind of critique against marriage. And there's this thing there is this idea, and I think in the end of the day, and I'm talking to you as someone that, was in an abusive marriage and I left that marriage. But if you can raise your children where there is that nuclear family is valued, where the husband and wife is involved, in the end of the day, teenagers are product of that, the upbringing of their family and they're part of the culture and things like that. So a lot of time when teenagers have huge issues emotionally, mentally, especially 13, 14, 15, a lot of that can be a product or outcome of the dynamic between the mother and father and the messages they received about men and women and from them and their mother and their father. And I saw that with in my situation with my divorce, when my oldest was 16, the confusion and the things that he was being told and that. And so it took a long time for him to be able to see, alhamdulillah, he's 22 and he's in a much better place. But it took a long time for him to kind of analyze some of the unspoken rules and views that he'd received around women. And also I had to go through this, I suppose, what's the word? I had to go through a kind of acceptance or grief of what my perception of men were, because I'd had bad experiences. I know that I'm raising 5 boys here, and I can't put on my ideology or my hurt wounds onto my children.
Onto them.
Yeah. So the fact is that we have such a powerful effect on how we shape our children. Yes, social media has a huge impact and it's bringing these ideologies in. But for us to check in with ourselves, how healthy marriages are, because they do affect our children. They affect eventually our teenagers, how they are raised. And people, part of alarming high divorce rates is because people think that sometimes the grass is greener, or it just seems a bit easier to walk out than to actually deal with conflict resolution skills, good communication, how to deal with those basic skills that build healthy, psychologically healthy, good children. And I think sometimes we have to look back at us as parents in our relationships. What is the thing that I need to work on so that I'm less defensive, say, or I'm not carrying a negative view. And many people I work with, many of the women I work with that have a lot of issues, is them working through their fatherhood wound. And their fatherhood wound was that they weren't allowed to have a relationship with their father, or their father was perceived in a very negative way. And they have a lot of issues as women, because their first relationship with the person that was meant to be there and support them, there was kind of this negativity that they weren't allowed to have. I'm talking about not abusive fathers, I'm talking about in other situations. But just being aware that we, as anyone that's listening to this, as an adult, checking in with how healthy your perception is of the opposite sex, because you're going to impact your perception to your child, your impact how you see the opposite gender, especially if you're raising boys or girls, it doesn't really matter. Your imprint, your perception, your views are subconsciously being downloaded to these children that grow up into teenagers. And so it affects the next generation. So really checking in with yourself. You're raising children, you're raising teenagers, how what you need to kind of check in with yourself, your own attachment, your own wounds, your own beliefs, and check in with yourself. Is this really in line with what Islam is? And is it, and accepting where in Islam is the solution to this? Because Islam will always give you the answer. You just got to go back into your routine and the support to get the answers. And I'm not diminishing. I always feel like you have to have a disclaimer when you're talking. I'm not saying that you stay in disruptive marriages. I'm just saying look at the health of that marriage and work on the health of that marriage, because that will have an effect on those children raised in that home.
Yeah, mashallah. Brother Michael Abraham, any final thoughts?
Well, one advice I give to parents of teenagers is to not encourage them to take things slow after they get out of high school. And the school system, in combination with the post-secondary system, it's still very adamant about encouraging kids to go to college and get a degree in 4 years. And there is big pressure to do that. And, that the universities want that very much. And it sinks kids into debt if they take on loans. It oftentimes gets kids on tracks that they don't necessarily want to be on when they're still figuring things out. I think it's a very good idea for Muslims who have had to put their kids in the public school system. The reality with so many kids is they have not learned the deen. Like they sometimes, for all intents and purposes, externally they look Muslim. They're at age 16, 17, but they really know very, very little about the deen. And I will find with these kids, if you go and judge those kids on social media, you're going to think one thing about them and think they're all terrible and they're often this. But if you actually know those kids on a day-to-day basis, you'd find it's a completely different story. And many of them, despite what they do on social media, they actually very much value the fact that they're Muslim. They know Islam is important, and they very much want to learn more about the deen. And they're dismayed that they have not had the opportunity to. And the reality is, putting kids in weekend schools through their K through 12 experience will not do the job for a variety of reasons.
Right.
So I think it's smart for Muslim parents in the West who they've had to have their kids in the public school system K through 12 to start setting it as an expectation or setting a culture where the kids take a year off, maybe even 2 years after high school, and they learn about the deen during that time. Support them financially, support them residentially as you have to, but let them take some time off after high school. Let them decompress and get some distance from the social experience of high school a little bit, and encourage them to learn the deen in somewhat of a systematic way. And then they can set that foundation before they really start going off into studying other things and going off into their career, this type of thing. And there's actually a lot of advantages to doing college at a slower pace than trying to condense it all into 4 years. You can learn better, you can pay for it better, and there's all different types of opportunities to get work experience and other experience that's valuable as well.
MashaAllah. Beautiful, beautiful discussion, amazing insight. And we hope that our communities are able to watch these episodes. They can benefit from them. There's so much knowledge being shared here, so many practical advice, as well as, professional advice, mashallah, from two experienced speakers, coaches, consultants, alhamdulillah. I want to wrap up by saying and re-emphasizing what Sister Khadija says and Brother Michael Abraham. Islam has a solution in the end for everything. Islam has the solution for everything. The challenge is how to extract the information. We have the divinely revealed sources. We have the content, but I think we are way behind when it comes to the delivery, the way we deliver the curriculum. Okay, pedagogy, as we call it in education, right? Our pedagogy is very weak. We have the content, we have content that is divinely revealed, but we need to really work on how to give this information, I think we spoke in one of the first episodes, how to inspire, right? Teaching is about inspiring, right? The teaching is a transfer of knowledge with the objective of inspiring so that that person is going to now take that knowledge, internalize it, comprehend it, and action will result from that. Positive action that will benefit the community, that will benefit the ummah. Jazakallah khair. Thank you so much for being with us today. Alhamdulillah, Coach Khadija, Brother Michael Abraham. Check out their Instagram, check out their work, check out Brother Michael Abraham's book. Alhamdulillah, you can order it from Amazon. Coach Khadija is coaching mothers on how to connect, mashallah, to their children, parenting, and so on. Thank you so much, both of you. Hopefully, we get to meet again and discuss some of these topics, which are so important to our ummah. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless both of you and your families. And Jazakumullah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam.